So although this is good news from Employment Energy Alberta, I think there are forces out there that would kill this deal if they could. What do you say to that?
Luddites,
Hmm.
Luddites. They're threatened. I'll tell you the tell in Wab Kinu's little video. First of all, I'm tired of his cutesiness. His people are impoverished by his terrible policies. He plays on this like cutesy shtick. It's embarrassing. He uses these weasel words that I find disgusting.
Hmm.
Right? I do not find him funny. I do not find him entertaining. He's destroyed the prosperity of his own people, and he's pretended it's because he's got some ethical insight into how bad it is to have prosperity and growth from free markets. He used the language surveillance capitalism to
Right,
talk about a data center.
right.
Now, if you unpack that, that's coming straight out of the dark sort of basement of this weird leftist antagonism, this Antifa level antagonism to the reality that has just dawned, and it's starting to dawn in Canada, dawned other places, years ago, that the entire environmental game was to basically watch the West, self-defeat any of its economic growth by attacking the energy that was the basis for that economic growth. And you saw this with the anti-fossil fuel stuff. You saw it in the 70s and 80s with the antagonism to nuclear, which set us back, a couple decades in sustainable, by the way, carbon zero energy, nuclear. And it's reactive. It's deeply pessimistic about capital markets, and it's going to like set Manitoba back.
Well, in Canada, under Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau before him, we became used to industrial announcements really being government announcements in a kind of crony capitalism, where a company would agree to open a plant, typically in Ontario or Quebec, but only if there were massive, quote, investments by taxpayers, typically federal taxpayers and those in Ontario. I think, for example, of the tens of billions of dollars shoveled into electric vehicle battery plants. I think before that of wind turbines. So it is almost like seeing a unicorn in the wild to hear of an announcement that is 11 figures in size of private sector investment that didn't need a major projects office, didn't need a intervention by the Prime Minister to assist us. And so it is that Meta, once called Facebook, has announced a $13 billion data center to be built in Alberta. No government money. In fact, the numbers being bragged about are the amount of money that will be paid in taxes, in salaries, in construction, in maintenance. I think it's the first industrial piece of good news that I've seen in months. Joining us now to talk about this, who's someone who knows both about investments and finance, but also about how hard it is to bring investment back to Alberta once they've been spooked. He used to work for the Premier of Alberta and has created Alberta investment companies. I'm talking about my friend David Legg, who joins us now from the Stampede in Calgary. David, great to see you again.
Great to see you, Ezra.
This announcement sort of sneaked up on, I think, a lot of people. It's not like oil sands or pipelines. It's always in the national conversation. Tell us a little bit about this new data center that 13 billion is what I see reported. What does that mean? First of all, what is a data center?
Well, a data center is a huge stack of chips that allow you to provide the pathway you need for massive amounts of computing power to be processed to support all of the applications of computing power. The most important application now is AI, which basically is infrastructure for almost any corporate operation, and particularly for any sort of very solid natural language-based application like law, accounting, analysis, advisory work, et cetera. So it's the backbone of a modern data-driven economy. And that's one of the things that makes the announcement so exciting, because it's not just that somebody's investing in Alberta, it's that the investment they're making is the 21st century version of bridges and airports. This is something that takes Alberta into the next century. And a lot of other jurisdictions are refusing to have data centers because they don't like the consumption of water. But Ezra, this data announcement from Meta, first of all, a couple fun facts about this. This is only the tip of the iceberg. The 13 billion is the first announcement. It doesn't cover what the total investment will be. So there's more to come. The second thing is the Meta announcement is part of a massive ecosystem development based on a series of policy changes that have been made over the last 4 years very quietly, that is making Alberta into one of the #1 jurisdictions in all of North America for data centers. And you'll see another 20 in the works, already working their way through the municipal governments here. So it's not just that Meta is a big deal. It is a huge deal. It's going to become even bigger over time. There's going to be other announcements within the Meta framework, but it's also a very important catalyst for an entire ecosystem of data centers and development of electricity. And the minister is announcing a very big expansion of the electrical grid in the province as well. But I'll tell you the other thing that's interesting about it. It's the point you made. We spent 4 years from 2019 to about 2024 making a lot of changes in the Alberta regulatory environment, tax environment. You know, one of the first things we did was cut the corporate tax from 12 to 8. And within only 4 years, we were making more tax receipts from the lower tax rate than we were making from the higher one. And, you know, across Canada, there's so many opportunities to unlock free market opportunity investments with the largest companies, best companies in the world. And one of the things we did with that economic strategy that I worked on for then Premier Kenney and you know, now Premier Smith is running it and doing a great job, is we have these incredible natural advantages in the energy that we've got. And the biggest deal that we did that took about 3 years was the Dow deal. I don't know if you remember that, but it's taking our gas molecules, splitting them into ethylene, and then using that as the basis for the development of advanced materials with one of the best chemistry companies in the world, Dow. And that was a $16 billion all-in announcement that included $2 billion from Linde Corporation and other big companies. And you know, we had Air Products come in around that. We've had a lot of an ecosystem of industrial development, and none of it has required the Alberta government to put taxpayer dollars in. This is all risk capital, but it's not risk capital from some random company. This is the best company in its category in the planet, choosing to be in Alberta instead of being in Louisiana, Texas, or Ohio in the Dow case. Choosing to be in Alberta in Meta's case instead of being in a place like Iowa or one of the states that's competing very heavily. And what we're doing with Meta is we're taking, you know, gas molecules and we're converting them into data through the process of just powering these enormous data centers and turning that power into computing power that then is used to accelerate the part of the economy that we think is going to be one of the fastest growth elements of the economy. And a lot of this is being developed by, you know, dozens of people that no Albertan will ever meet, but you know, from ministers to investors to people that, you know, went out and worked on some of the problems that Meta was having along the way. And all along the way, Alberta was being responsive to this great company, Meta, and refining our policies and refining the environment we're operating in so we became the most attractive jurisdiction. And when you solve for a big company like Dow, or you solve for one of the best companies in the world like Meta, then you create the environment where you just see economic growth flourish. And you're going to see that happen with data centers in Alberta.
Canada's been told to just quit smoking for decades, same message over and over, and yet millions of Canadians still smoke. So let's ask a follow-up question. For those who don't quit, what about change? In 2026, Canada has options that didn't exist years ago. Smoke-free alternatives for adults who would otherwise continue smoking. That doesn't mean risk-free, it means informed choice. If you don't smoke, don't start. If you smoke, quit. But for those who don't quit, change could still be part of the conversation. That's why Canadians should check out unsmoke.ca, an information resource focused on smoke-free alternatives and honest facts, not judgment. Put the lighter down, Canada. Learn what your options are. There's so many interesting things there. You mentioned U.S. Locations that would have been competitive. My mind turned first to Ontario and Quebec, which have a larger population. They have more universities. Toronto is actually a bit of a tech capital in its own right. So for Meta to make the choice to go to Alberta is very interesting. It's probably an energy choice, a tax choice. And what's interesting is some people are saying this independence debate is causing a higher risk profile for the province. Well, I guess Meta didn't think that was the case, or they thought if there was independence, that data center is still going to be there. But I just keep coming back to the fact that the last time we heard $13 billion being spent, it was some goofy grant to, I don't know, Volkswagen to build electric vehicles. That, why are we giving money? It was giving from taxpayers to companies. It wasn't companies putting this kind of dough into Canada. I don't know. It certainly is a happy change. Why do you think it didn't go into Ontario somewhere or Quebec somewhere?
Well, look, there's a few reasons, and what's interesting is there's two things happening. One is Invest Alberta, which is the agency that I created when I was working for Premier Kenney. That agency is an absolute copy of the Irish Development Agency, which is the best, set the standard, gold standard globally, for taking a small country which is almost the same size as Alberta, and using, in spite of it has very limited resources compared to Alberta, built a massive technology hub in Ireland using only tax strategy. You see examples of this. Singapore is a great example of this, a little island state with very few natural resources and a problem with water and surrounded by swamps and an antagonistic next door neighbor, Malaysia, no natural assets except one deep water port. And they've created the highest per capita income on the planet and the most advanced city on the planet. You see this in Abu Dhabi, you see it in Hong Kong. You see these jurisdictions that have taken very little resources, natural resources, and created these economic superstructures that are the envy of the world. They're also very safe places. They're also places where people, can take home more of their income than they give to the government. And so what's really interesting to me is why can't Canada be the best place in the world to invest or build a business or raise a family? And I think when you ask that question, you look around the world at best practice examples for foreign direct investment or economic development. We found one in Ireland. We've copied some of it. And one of the keys to that economic development strategy is going to the best companies in the world and saying, look, we've already got some of the best energy companies in the world. We've got some of the best infrastructure companies in the world right here in Alberta. But we'd love to build a diversified economy rooted in technology, rooted in advanced materials. And we'd like to talk to you, Dow, about what it would take to win against Louisiana and Texas, where you already have a lot of assets and it's easy for you to build another one. What would it take to win that business here in Alberta and show the world that the best, most sort of complicated, hardest to build assets and the intellectual property that comes with those and the extraordinary economic momentum that comes with those could be built here instead of somewhere else on the planet? What would it take? And the more that you do that work, the more you found out that Alberta could beat any place on the planet, any place. And you also know, like I had 4 guests early in the Stampede here, and one of them is the chairman and CEO of Linde Corporation, Sanjeev Lamba. And I said to Sanjeev, I'm going to be on a podcast with somebody. I was talking with Rob Breckenridge about the MOU. And I said, Sanjeev, there's a question in the air in Canada right now, which is that there's this debate, this referendum that's going to happen in Alberta. There's going to be 9 questions about things like immigration policy and choosing judges and law. But the last question is going to be on, do you want to have a referendum about independence? And Sanjeev's company has put more than $2 billion into Alberta in the last 4 years. And I've worked with his team on that, and some of that's related to their big client Dow and what they've committed to and built. And he said, it's interesting to hear that. We'd like to discuss that further, how you think that would work. But the bottom line is people actually have this sense that if you're the kind of jurisdiction that spent a lot of time with them rationally trying to build the conditions for them to invest here the same way that they do in places like Singapore or Connecticut or England or Abu Dhabi, right? When you work with them like that, they actually think these guys have their act together. If they have to have a family debate around what the best structure for their position in Confederation is, go ahead, have that debate. I mean, we'll be interested in the effect that could have on our assets, of course, and on our investment. But they don't fundamentally believe that the investment they've made in Alberta is at risk at all. They just think that whatever the structure of the kind of constitutional arrangements will be what it will be. They don't want to actually engage in those debates. They're very careful not to want to be seen to be having a perspective on it. But the idea that there's some sort of like fear factor in the investment community putting capital into Alberta versus anywhere else in Canada, I could tell you what the fear factor is. The fear factor is observing the disaster of watching a government take over an asset like TMX and absolutely blow out the numbers in a way that makes it totally impossible to imagine ever privately funding a pipeline. Right? TMX is a global disaster in terms of somebody that's an investor looking at a country saying, I'd like to build that. You know, Kinder Morgan got bought out and the government showed that they cannot build anything that's economical.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that the real flight of capital has been the flight of capital across Canada. And the one place that's an exception to that is Alberta. Yeah. In the last 3 years, Invest Alberta has drawn more capital into Alberta than Ontario, Quebec, BC, and the rest of the country combined. Right? And that's not because we're good at marketing. It's because we have a strategy that speaks to the best companies, asks what the conditions are to get them here. And what we find out is they need certain policy changes that actually end up being eminently reasonable and great for Alberta, great for Albertans, and great for the ecosystem that company represents. And once they make that decision, right now, you know that in boardrooms across the states, which is principally where the superscalers are, Amazon, Google, Meta, all these places are looking at the Meta deal and saying, now we're interested. You got to find out why they chose to do that. We need to figure out if we need to choose to do that. Alberta just got on the short list of 20 major industrial projects in the last 2 days because everybody that's got to present something to their board now has a no-fault reason to make sure that Alberta is one of the jurisdictions that's on the list. And that's the power of the Dow deal. That's the power of the Meta deal. You know, we do a lot of smaller deals, but those big ones with the global sort of industry defining decision makers are going to create a lot of momentum for Alberta. And just in the last 2-3 days, having a lot of conversations with existing and potential investors here, there's incredible excitement about lower, cleaner, simpler regulations. I still think the Alberta corporate tax rate could drop by a couple points and we'd make even more capital in the public fisc off of the economic momentum that's generated by these companies, realizing that this is a place that continues to change to make the environment for building a business better and better every year.
A very interesting point. I mean, everyone knows that Facebook is a leading company by almost any measure. So if Facebook's due diligence says this is the winner, then a lot of other companies are saying either what do they know that we don't, or that's a pretty good confirmation to follow. Like for them to plunk 13 billion down, like you say, it's a signal to others. The smartest people in the world, or some of the smartest people in the world, have given it a green light. You know, there used to be a saying, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, as in you're safe now. Facebook has shown you're safe to go to Alberta. But let me say something on the countervailing side, because about a week ago, I saw a video made by Wab Kinew, who's a fairly popular premier, partly because he's so unusual in his social media style. Like he's got a shtick to him and he's got a bit of a sense of humor. But here's a clip of him saying he was canceling a data center in Manitoba pretty much just because.
We're not going to move ahead with the data center in Ile-des-Chênes because there's a big threat to the environment and not much benefit to the economy. I reject the idea that we have to be slaves to surveillance capitalism in order to participate in the modern economy. And so the message to any company out there should be, if you want to have a thoughtful, human-centered approach to technology, come to Manitoba, because that's what we're interested in.
So you've got Wab Kinew, who just killed a huge deal for his province, not this big, but a big one. And it sort of had like I don't like data centers. That's not the kind of business I like, as if there's a line of companies going into Manitoba. Leslyn Lewis, who I like, she's got a lot of good values and she's very strong. She had a skeptical tweet today saying, I might be persuaded, but I'm a bit worried about this. And I saw a Globe and Mail reporter say, oh, this is going to use so much energy. It's this many gigawatt hours. That's 2/3 as much as the city of Edmonton. Now, by the way, I think that's actually true. But that's sort of the point about Alberta, is it has an enormous amount of energy, whether it's natural gas, whether we're bringing in uranium from our cousins in Saskatchewan. So I'm seeing what I'm not going to call it a snobby response. Wab Kinew was sort of looking down his nose at data centers, but I think there's sort of a populist distrust of big corporations that really got deepened during COVID. When you have a huge company, and people are mad at Facebook for censorship reasons. I still am. So you have distrust of Mark Zuckerberg, distrust of super big companies, distrust of AI, distrust of huge data centers, which I think China is helping to whip up, because I think China wants to beat the West at computing
100%.
and data. And so I think they, just like there's a big op going on with Iran and Qatar online, I think China does not want the West to go big on data centers. So although this is good news from Employment Energy Alberta, I think there are forces out there that would kill this deal if they could. What do you say to that?
Luddites. Luddites. They're threatened. You know, I'll tell you the tell in Wab Kinew's little video. First of all, I'm tired of his cutesiness. His people are impoverished by his terrible policies. He plays on this like cutesy shtick. It's embarrassing. He uses these weasel words that I find disgusting, right? I do not find him funny. I do not find him entertaining. He's destroyed the prosperity of his own people, and he's pretended it's because he's got some ethical insight into how bad it is to have prosperity and growth from free markets. He used the language surveillance capitalism to talk about a data center.
Right.
Now, if you unpack that, you know that's coming straight out of the dark sort of basement of this weird leftist antagonism, this Antifa level antagonism to the reality that has just dawned, and it's starting to dawn in Canada, dawned other places, you know, years ago, that the entire environmental game was to basically watch the West, you know, self-defeat any of its economic growth by attacking the energy that was the basis for that economic growth. And you saw this with the anti-fossil fuel stuff. You saw it in the 70s and 80s with the antagonism to nuclear, which set us back, you know, a couple decades in sustainable, by the way, carbon zero energy, nuclear. And it's reactive. It's deeply pessimistic about capital markets, and it's going to like set Manitoba back. So he with a stroke of a pen, which is totally anti-democratic, has decided that he's against something, that actually he's utilizing the assets that consume this data to tell his story. Right. So he's this social media guy. That's his way of processing policy, using exactly the thing that's consuming all the data that he now wants to have not in his backyard. So he's going to keep doing his TikTok videos or his Instagramming or his Facebook or whatever his particular social media strategy is. But he just wants all of that stuff to be driven with infrastructure that exists elsewhere, benefiting other communities, benefiting other markets. And so, you know, look, I understand, and you and I both share concern with the idea that a social media culture becomes vapid, and that people stop thinking for themselves, and that people start swallowing the, you know, and I'm less concerned about capitalist surveillance because that tends to have market dynamics to it, although I still think it's problematic. I understand some of the language that comes from, but I'm far more concerned about government surveillance that's run by bureaucrats that tend to be default set to the left and to decide that hate speech is anything that doesn't conform to their particular worldview. Because they can't make those arguments in the public square, so they want to isolate those arguments and make them, you know, verboten in the public square by using, you know, language that is the kind of language that Kinew is using. And I think it's problematic at a lot of levels. So with Wab Kinew, my response is horseshit. I don't think that there's any chance that that guy has thought through the economic impact of denying, you know, it's like hearing a guy in the 1800s decide that we're not going to have, you know, ports and bridges here because that's a form of surveillance port capitalism. It makes absolutely no sense. It kind of sounds sexy in sort of that freshman college, you know, your first time reading French critical theory, and so now you've got a perspective. This is not the panopticon that Lacan or Derrida or Foucault were concerned about, right? This is a data center that's going to take energy that's currently unutilized and make it into something that can help your universities do advanced research on supercomputers. And now you can't do that in Manitoba, but you're going to do it in Alberta. For Leslin, I think there's something else going on. And I think it probably ties a little bit to some of the skepticism that you see on the right in the United States that's resulting in some antagonism locally to the way data centers are being executed. And actually, I'm hugely sympathetic to that. I don't think you just say, look, go anywhere, get a government grant to do it and build your thing here, right? I think there has to be conditions where you're very clear about who all the stakeholders are, what their interests are, and how you defend and protect those. And that's what Alberta's been doing for 4 years. And it's been a debate. There were a lot of points at which the Meta discussion was getting close to, being derailed. The Stampede last year, we had a conversation with a few of their senior executives, and there were some real sticking points. And so you have to work those things through. These deals are really hard to do. But once you've done them, the point is you create the conditions for there to be ongoing development, and you're going to see a lot more data centers. And I'll tell you this, Ezra, in 5-10 years, the difference between the province that has 30 or 40 incredibly powerful data centers providing an architectural and infrastructure backbone to a data economy is going to be thriving. And every other business that wants to build that depends on data is going to want to be in a place where you've got highly secure access to the fastest processing speeds in the world. And there are whole industries that will be born out of the fact that we've built that infrastructure. It's not just Meta and data centers. This is the backbone for superhighway infrastructure that you can put huge project and platform projects through. And that's what makes it exciting. I'd like to know, because I do, with you, respect Leslie Lewis, I'd like to unpack why she's taking the position of being skeptical out of the gate. Is that rooted in a very specific view on energy utilization? Is it rooted in skepticism about these superscalers and the effect, the second order effects on our culture of having a social media driven culture? I mean, there's a lot of important critiques to have, but I wouldn't transfer the critique over the negative effects of social media on our culture and the coarsening of our culture into the infrastructure of data centers required to do 1,000 other things that don't just relate to social media in the way that a lot of these companies are understood.
Yeah. There's an interesting wave of right-wingers who are a little bit more socialist on the economic side. It's a reaction, I think, to the success of true communists from Zoran Mamdani and even the popularity of communist killers like Luigi Mangione, who murdered that healthcare executive in New York a year or two ago. So there, you can even see it in sort of J.D. Vance when he says, well, Milton Friedman's economics don't really work anymore. Like there's this vibe. I'm calling it a vibe because I don't think it's deeper than an aesthetic feeling. Let me read to you. I have it on my phone here. Here's what Leslie Lewis had to say, and I'd invite you to
I'd love to
respond. So she made a couple of tweets, and by the way, I really like her. And I want to give her absolutely the best benefit of the doubt. And I think sometimes in political life, we sort of talk out our ideas out loud, like we think out loud, and we don't want to stop people from raising ideas. But I think her ideas could merit a direct response. Here, let me read. She's got 2 tweets. I'll read the first. You can reply, and then I'll read the second if you've got the time to do it. She says, before the government celebrates another AI announcement, Canadians deserve to know how this data center will actually be built when Canada is already facing serious constraints in energy infrastructure, grid capacity, engineering capacity, and skilled labor. AI data centers require enormous amounts of reliable power, specialized construction, advanced cooling, transmission infrastructure, cybersecurity, and technical expertise. After 11 years of failing to build the energy infrastructure Canada needs, the government must explain whether this project is truly viable and who will ultimately own, control, and benefit from the infrastructure if it proceeds. Now, my instinct is most of those are business questions for Meta to worry about. Appreciate your concern about will you find workers. Those are good problems to have. But that's my reflexive response. It sounds like you've been thinking about this project for years. I've been thinking about it for about 2 days. So give me your deeper response, and then I'll read you her second tweet.
Well, I think her tweet betrays a misunderstanding of what's going on. This is not for the government to do anything but respond to economic forces with really successful policy initiatives, which is what this government has done. The Nathan Neudorf on infrastructure worked at, and some private guys like Brett Wilson was involved with this and helped solve some problems with Meta. Nate Glubish, who's Minister for Innovation, took it up. Rick Christians is the CEO of Invest Alberta at the time when AWS first came in and was starting to build here. That's where we really developed the strategy. And I was senior advisor to Rick and the team at Invest Alberta when they started to work on what are the policies that needed to be passed that would answer for these questions so that the public, when they found out about it, would understand what a positive this was. And Meta needed to work on a few things, and Alberta needed to work on a few things. Same thing had happened during the Dow negotiations. So Leslie's first tweet there, I think, betrays this sad reality of Canadian politics, which is she's asking the government to explain something. And that just shows how far down the road we've gone from being a free market, open economy, where the government's in Alberta was creating the conditions for an announcement from Meta, where Meta will proceed with these things and they will bring their own energy over time. They'll develop that in collaboration with Pembina and others. And you'll see the development and expansion of the electrical grid as a result of these things. Yeah. And I think the momentum that having Meta come in and say, we want to build 13 billion is the tip of the iceberg, Ezra. It's going to be a much higher number than that, actually. But, we're going to start with the $13 billion external infrastructure piece. That's our first announcement. But what's happening is now Alberta's saying, okay, now we're going to be a global player in the data center game. We're going to have some of the fastest data capacity and deepest compute in the world right here in Alberta and Canada. Who would have thought? We're doing that with some of the best guys, but now we've got 20 other people coming in. And that there are going to be, the other huge players are going to be taking a look, because we're now creating economies of scale, an economic platform that makes us more attractive than other places in the United States or anywhere else in the world. And Alberta can continue to do these kind of deals. So I think I'd encourage Leslin to pick up the phone and talk to Minister Joseph Scow, who's a great guy. He's leading the economic development file that Invest Alberta ultimately, reports into and works on. She could talk to Nate Glubish, all conservatives, all working on this stuff, trying to figure out how do we build the next generation economy in this province off of some of the existing assets we have. And when you have as much great, clean, ethically made energy as we've got, $15 trillion worth of it, you can take a very, very tiny fraction of that and use that to create an entire compute infrastructure that then can be used to expand to service 30 or 40 other entire industries at a scale that is totally competitive globally and exceeds anything else happening in the country. And so the point to Leslin is, this is enabling a free market in a place that was overtaxed and overregulated for a while. And as we remove some of those regulations, we pass some policies to clarify the opportunity for that industry. That industry will thrive. And when that industry thrives, it has this multiplier effect on other industries, self-reinforcing other industries. You want to do ag tech? Well, now you've got some of the fastest data bandwidth in the planet, right? You want to build capital markets trading desks in Calgary? Well, these will be some of the fastest, best, most linked trading platforms in the planet. And that's what makes it so exciting. It's an infrastructure investment that's being made privately instead of going to the farmers and the moms and the nurses and the firemen saying, we're going to take $50 billion of your hard-earned money that you paid at these crazy 50% rates over years, and we're going to give it away to like Nordic companies that basically don't have the capacity to compete with China or Tesla. And we're going to do it because fashionably we want to be seen to be environmental, and we think EVs sound environmental, which they're not. And then we're going to lose it all in 4 years. Yeah. And then we're going to blame the economic conditions and Donald Trump. Yeah. And then we're going to answer that problem by, after failing to compete with Tesla with an EV failed thing, we're going to borrow more money from the nurses and doctors and firemen. We're going to give it away to Telesat, which is a poor man's version of space, of Starlink. Yeah. And then when that doesn't make any sense to anybody in the markets, because no one will buy Telesat stock in any normal company, we're going to go and take a gravel pit, and we're going to call it a launch pad, even though there's never been a rocket on it. And we're going to give that $1 billion because we don't have launch capacity, because everyone's saying, well, Telesat can only get its 98 satellites in the air if it uses SpaceX to do it. So how does any of this make sense? So we're going to now have a launch pad with no rockets. Yeah. And the satellites aren't going to be made by us. Like, what are we doing? Why are we competing with SpaceX and Starlink? Yeah. What's going on? Why are we doing it with taxpayer dollars? If this makes any sense at all, here's the Alberta solution, right? If you're in Alberta and you get to run Ottawa for a day, I wish, then you might just go to SpaceX and say, hey, we want to have low Earth orbital satellites providing extraordinary seamless internet coverage to our entire north, all of our rural communities across the entire country. We've put, $3 billion, more than the entire market cap of Telesat, in grants and loans into this company that's worth half the amount of the grants and loans the federal government has given them. And we know that you guys have launched almost 10,000 low Earth orbital satellites. These guys have a white paper to launch 98 in about 3 years. And we're giving $3 billion. Why don't we give you $3 billion? You just give us in perpetuity northern and rural coverage on a Starlink basis. and we'll do a deal as a sovereign with you, right?
Yeah.
They could do it tomorrow. Tomorrow, every rural community in this country could be switched on and hooked up, and we would have all the benefits of the infrastructure of immediate internet access for every small trading post and family and community and school in the north. So the point is, if your goal as a government is to say, no, some things require government expenditure, and one of them is we want to link everybody up in these remote communities, then why not do that with the best company in the world that does it better than anybody else? Why invent this weird, sad, Laurentian, credentialed crowd that can never get anything in the air, that can never deliver anything on time, that managed to always lose the money and then retire and live in St. Kitts? Like, why do we have to deal with these people? Why not invite the best company in the world and say, Canada would love to make Tesla run some factories here. We'd like to have Starlink have a base, have a star base in the north. Like, that's what we're doing in Alberta. We're saying to Meta, we're not going to come in and say the government wants to build data centers. We're going to ask the best guys in the world to come and build them and what the conditions would be. And then we can create an ecosystem around that. And Alberta will flourish as a result of having that infrastructure based here. Yeah. And the government, to Leslie's point, will be out of the picture. Yeah. Right? It'll create the conditions and then step out so these companies can come here and compete with each other.
You know, the favorite part for me of the press conference announcing this data center was the lack of Evan Solomon, the AI minister. And wow. You know that it's real because you talk about that little space station. My colleague Lincoln Jay and I went out there to Nova Scotia to try and find.
Did you really go there?
We went out there.
And I knew you're such a disturbing.
It's hard to get to.
Stuff.
And the last mile, actually, we couldn't actually get to the gravel pit itself, but we could see it. And
is it a security?
You know, we studied the deal. The government's paying them $20 million a year to rent that gravel pit, and they gave them 1 year's back pay rent, $20 million a year. It's the purpose of it is not to launch rocket ships. The purpose of it is to spread around $20 million a year to all the right liberals. So all the things you've described, you are thinking like, well, success is the goal. Putting a rocket into space is no, it's not. Yeah. It's the busyness, it's the churn, it's the back and forth, it's taking care of all my lobbyist friends. That's the purpose of it. It's a totally different mindset. And it wouldn't surprise me if, as you prophesy that there will be more data centers coming to Alberta, I think you're probably right. And I think it'll come to the point.
I know I'm right on that. That just is what's happening right now.
You might see a call for a data center tax. You might see the same sort of antipathy that we've had towards pipelines be projected. I mean, you'll have a Bernie Sanders style, we have to stop this. You'll have
the left hates this stuff, by the way, as they're like, it's coming. This will be the new pipeline protest stuff. But one of the reasons they're so worried about it is because it does consume an enormous amount of energy, which we have in massive abundance. And we're converting that energy from like latent molecules sitting in the ground into data compute that allows people to do the most extraordinary scientific discoveries in our universities. And if you want a great trade, figure out all the steps it takes to take gas molecules that have been sitting in the ground latent and turn those into scientific discoveries at universities. And that's what data centers do. They're magic. Yeah. and that's the beauty of the economy. If you give a bunch of crazy engineers free rein, they're going to come up with crazy ideas like putting satellites in space so that people can talk to each other across the planet. And eventually that thing they dream up that everybody thinks is dumb 10 years later is worth $2 trillion. And there's a bunch of guys in Austin. Have you ever looked at the numbers of how many billionaires and, deca and centi millionaires and millionaires are in Austin just from SpaceX? I mean, it's thousands. Yeah. And so you want to say, okay, what if instead of Austin, what if that was Red Deer?
Yeah.
And people are like, they laugh, but then I'm like, but why not? Yeah. Like, let me ask this simple question. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
Why can't Starbase be outside Red Deer? What is it? Are Canadians incapable? This is a question I had the other day. Somebody said, well, tanker ban. I said, let me ask you a simple question. This is a burning question because this is the kind of question you get when you travel overseas. If you're in Singapore, people say, it's really interesting. What is this tanker ban thing? Canadians don't back themselves to be able to like ship stuff like everybody else in the world does. You suddenly realize they look at us like we're we look like this sad country. It has suddenly decided we're incapable of traversing environmentally sensitive areas like everybody else in the world does all the time. And you ultimately have to just explain, no, it's not that. It's actually that these things in Canada have become a political football. They're used to score political points, or they're used to do the anti-Robin Hood. They're used to rob the nurses, doctors, teachers, and everyone else who pays taxes of their tax money and give it to the rich. Right? Who are the connected, the politically hooked up, and the people that can get ahead of what that next performative policy will be. And when you double click on it, you just say, there's no way a gravel pit that was trading hands 3 years ago into people that are politically connected suddenly became worth, $200 million over a few years. Like that's obviously graft. But in Alberta, I think the good news is, Ezra, the more that we do this, the more industries we do this in. I mean, watch for defense. Defense is going to be another great one that I'm super excited about. A lot of people don't know why Alberta is going to be a defense and aerospace center, but it will be. And it'll be that in about 5 years. You're going to see the groundwork slowly get laid now, and the same kind of strategies are going to happen. But we've already had, there's a lot of quiet announcements that have happened. But you saw how de Havilland moved to Calgary Airport. That was part of a strategy. You saw Lufthansa move to Calgary Airport. People often don't know that because that's the big reworking and the after servicing of these planes. They've quietly moved in from Germany. We're going to have in 5 years, you watch the space, there'll be another announcement like this that will suddenly define that we've gone from like the half dozen small data center announcements that we've had that no one paid attention to suddenly the biggest, best guys on the planet of the 6 superscalers saying, we're making our biggest commitment in Alberta. It's the best place in the world. And we're only going to announce the first 13 billion, but there's another 4 or 5 of those coming from these guys. And the same thing is going to happen in defense. Same way it happened in advanced materials with Dow. And we've had about 5 or 10 other firms in that same part of Alberta. And so what I'm excited about is this is a model that I believe ultimately is going to be adopted by the other provinces. And guys like Wab Kinew that are making his people poorer and trying to be cute and making it about himself and hiding behind these weird weasel words like surveillance capitalism as an excuse for shutting down the infrastructure his province needs to finally start to get ahead is tragic. And guys like him that are playing these games, people are like, oh, he's going to be like a Trudeau. And I'm like, I think he already is like that. And the fact that might work for a few people is sad, but I think people are getting over that. I think Manitobans deserve far better. And Leslyn needs to come to tell Leslyn when you see her, because I know you probably will before me, but she's got an open invitation to Calgary. We'll show her why she's wrong on this
that
one.
Tweet that I just read to you got a lot of feedback, especially from Albertans saying, "Butt out. We don't need. This is none of your affair." And like she got a lot of attitude readjustment from pro data center people. So she wrote a second tweet, and let me read it to you because you can see it's slightly less combative. Modified. And I mean, it shows that she's listening. Let me read her second tweet, which she wrote shortly thereafter. She said, "I welcome Alberta's success in attracting Meta's investment. A project of this scale demonstrates that Canada can compete for world-class AI infrastructure when government creates the right investment conditions. My concern has never been with Alberta's initiative. My concern is that after 11 years of federal policies that have delayed major energy and infrastructure development, Canada has made it far more difficult to attract and support innovation." I think she retracted pretty much 99% of her prickliness, which is good. I mean, we want people to adjust their views when more facts and arguments are brought to their attention. And listen, I'm glad she has that point of view. Have you seen any reaction to this announcement from Evan Solomon, Mark Carney, the people who love to take credit for, quote, investments? Have you seen any official government reaction to it from the feds?
No, look, Alberta's. I had a drink last night with a guy who's a major investor in mines and mining, and he said, David, I've been coming to this Calgary Stampede for 12 years. He said, this is the most optimistic, electric place I've ever seen. And he said that the momentum here is extraordinary. So if you think about it, Ezra, the MOU got announced. There's a lot of skepticism in the patch about that MOU, but the thing that people love about the MOU is it's highlighting all the questions that people want to have debates about in the province. And so the MOU added enormous kind of momentum to the province. Second thing is the announcement of the Shield pipeline that will go from from Hardisty all the way to Sarnia. I think we're going to end up having at some point a strategic petroleum reserve in the salt caves in Sarnia. I'm thinking about writing an op-ed about that with. I'll find a good liberal friend to write that with, but I think we need that as a nation. I think our heartland, our industrial heartland is still in that region. You've got great refining in Sarnia. I think we should build the energy superpower across the country, and I think that refining in Sarnia and that capacity to store a massive amount of strategic petroleum in reserve to allow price stabilization across the industrial heartland in both Quebec and Ontario, supported by Alberta on the energy side, would be phenomenal. That announcement from the Premier and Doug Ford went out. That's another pipeline. You've just got people feeling like, look, it's not perfect. There's a lot we'd want to tell some of our liberal cousins. I think the problem for guys like Evan Solomon and others is so much of the stuff has come off for people as performative.
Yeah.
The Meta deal took 4 years of really hard work, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of working out the strategy, a lot of different ministers working together. The Premier has got a bunch of ministers. It was Nate Horner, who's in finance now, Jason Nixon, Nate Glubish. It was Nathan Newdorf doing great work. You have now Sigurdsson. Like, you've got a lot of people that had to work together, didn't take all the credit for themselves, had to figure out a bunch of stuff, but had to show up on time, had to attend a bunch of calls, had to solve a bunch of stuff that was basically just dealing with admitting the private sector knows how to do a bunch of things the government doesn't know how to do. And by engaging with the private sector effectively and figuring out what the principled views that would result in the best outcomes for the public from building this infrastructure in Alberta, instead of letting it go somewhere else, would be, and make those trade-offs and have those arguments and debate those with Meta. And Meta's not a warm bath. These are tough guys. They're smart, and they know exactly what they want. They're going to get what they want. And Alberta has been really solid at defending the public interest and getting what it wants. So the concern that's sort of embedded in what Leslie Lewis did as an initial reaction is well understood, and she's a patriot and a great person. I sense from her text that what she really wanted to do was use the opportunity to throw a punch at the federal government. And she did, and I have a lot of respect for that. but this wasn't the best way to. This wasn't the right. This wasn't the right text. This wasn't the right structure to do it. But I think there are other places to throw a punch. But right now, let me say this: I think that the Prime Minister and his team are realizing that for a decade, he came out and said that this environmental kind of performative environmentalism of the last decade, which the Prime Minister Carney himself was a part of creating, but that performative environmentalism is over. It doesn't work. It's done nothing for the planet. It's set us back economically. It feels like they're trying to turn the page on that, which is good. I think that what I'd love to see is the federal government just saying, look, it looks like there's a model here that we should look at, which is instead of just taking this massive amount of public money that we don't have that could be spent on really important critical services and throwing it at performative ideas like EV plants or low Earth orbital satellites that are subscale or gravel pits that we're going to pretend are launch pads. Like, these things are so obviously just loss making for the public. And it's depressing for people, especially if the same guys doing that are actually actively supporting regulations that prevent the people that really build these things from being able to build those things in Canada and sending them south to build them in the States. And I think as they look at the number of kids with advanced degrees that have left the country and are almost all going to the US to build their dream companies now, the amount of foreign direct investment that's fled the country, the amount, and Alberta is the only thing, without Alberta right now, Canada on a per capita GDP basis now poorer than Mississippi. It's very hard to overstate how bad it's got. There's a guy here, the one liberal that's sort of an MP here, and he put up a post saying, on a per capita income to GDP basis, Canada is actually better than the United States. So I looked into that. I thought that's really interesting. You know what I found out, Ezra? In 2015, the per capita income of Canada was 63% better than it is today. These guys from 2015 to now, it's still better slightly because of the sort of the extraordinary top layer of the US wealth curve. But even on that per capita basis, on that median basis, we're still slightly better, but we're still decreased by 63% from where we were in 2015. So even our advantages have been eroded by these extraordinarily bad statist industrial policies. So love Leslie Lewis. She got this one wrong, I think, in my humble opinion. But I think the good news is when we start to see these things land, it's sending a lot of signals, which is the most important thing happening in the economy right now is not the honest debate about the best architecture for the Canadian Federation and Alberta's place in it. That debate embeds probably 20 or 30 very important debates that should be happening right now. And you hosted that debate between me and Keith, where I was trying to highlight, a dozen of the core issues that I think are related to that idea or that debate about independence. But it's certainly not making that big a difference in the investment judgments and decisions of some of the smartest people on the planet. And I think we're going to see more momentum than ever coming in here.